Welcome back to All the Work, my restoration of my 1987 Ski Supreme. On this day, I am removing the propeller, finally. First, when I had the boat in the back of the garage, I didn't have room to get in and get it, and I also didn't buy a prop remover tool until now. Now, I've only watched half a YouTube video at this point, and I'm actually not doing it right. I pulled the prop nut all the way off, which is a big no-no, and now I'm trying to use the puller tool, and I got a piece of wood stuck in there, and I'm tapping on the wrong end of the prop puller tool, and I'm using my tool, and Bryce is running around talking to me. He's on the other side of me sitting there talking, so I'm just doing it totally wrong, and here I go, a little penetrating oil, trying that, but then eventually I just give up, head inside, and watch more YouTube video. And then I come running back out because I realize the prop nut needs to be on, because if that thing were to pop off and the prop nut were to still not be attached, then the propeller would fall on the ground, ding up, and then I'd have a bad propeller. So I think here is where I learned that lesson. Yep, prop nut's going back on, now I'm doing it right. I've now watched the rest of the prop puller video on YouTube, and here is the successful prop pulling. A couple cranks on the prop puller, tap on the back side of it, which is good. A couple more cranks on the prop puller, a little more tap-tap-a-roo, and then it just kind of explodes and comes off, and you'll see that here in a second. And there it is, successful removal of the prop. Here we are that evening. I am getting prepared to replace the strut bearings in the strut. This part of the project was one of the more radical maneuvers I did in the whole thing. Flipping over a Sawzall and cutting through these bearings while trying not to damage that boot coming out of there was scary, having never done it before, having no feel for it, but it actually worked out really well. The first bearing came out super easy. I was able to cut through it quickly and easily. It's super soft metal, and the second one definitely took some doing. As you can see, it was difficult for me to kind of get my body position right, having the rudder in the way. It certainly would be easier with the rudder, but here comes the first bearing coming up towards me. Like I said, relatively easily, and then I start banging away at the second bushing. However, it's not cut all the way through, so now I'm getting back at it with the Sawzall. Tap, tap, tap. Maybe it's cut, maybe it's not. I had to lay down, look up in there with a light. Doing it at night definitely isn't the best way to do something like this, but what I'm doing. I even got out a clamp to try and bang that bushing out because the clamp is long. Now it zooms in here because, like an idiot, I moved the light and the light is facing at the camera, so I totally blow this shot, which I'm totally bummed about, because I think when push came to shove, this is one of the cooler things that I did in the whole project. What made this part so cool is that I put the new strut bearings into the chest freezer to cool them down and shrink them up, and after there goes the second strut bearing, it's out, and then I made a tool from parts I found at the Home Depot. First I took a rag and I cleaned out the bearing boot, and I made this tool from Home Depot out of a 10-inch rod, threaded rod, and a couple washers and nuts on each end. Here I am, I put the strut bearing in the front, and I just use that to tighten it down with a socket, and boom, it's in. And then just replace the Allen key set nuts on each side and totally replace. So really cool. Here it is. You can see them. They're new. Apparently that's a wear item. It says Ron Tanis, and it's replaced. So that was a pretty cool little project to do right there. Here I am sanding out some excess resin under the stuffing box. I am not going to be able to get the I guess you call that the boot, on to the stuffing box all the way because the resin is filled up too high underneath it. So I am just doing this little tiny bit of sanding so that I can get that boot all the way onto the stuffing box and then get a good clamp and seal on it. So there's the little black and blue boot there I'm putting on, testing it. This is one of those fun little, spend 45 minutes just trying to sand down a 1/16 of an inch worth of resin on a really tight, hard to get spot. But it just needs to get done because I'm going to reinstall the boat axle, and then the next day I'm putting the engine back in this bad Larry. Here we are 70 days into the project, and I am back down at Doug's house, and we're putting the engine back into this thing. I can't believe it took 70 days to do all this work, but it's what it took. So Doug's setup is to hoist the engine by just a 2x4 rafter in the garage, and when we started yanking on it, that 2x4 has definitely lifted a couple engines since we pulled it out of the boat, and that thing was looking super sketchy. So we got it in the air, and I hustled, and I backed the boat in super fast, and we started lowering it down, and thank goodness we did. Because that was the rafter snapping right there. So fortunately, that thing held on just long enough for us to get the engine semi-mounted. Now, we've got an axle from another ski boat there that we're using as a pry bar to try and get the engine to slide in properly. The front feet went on okay. The passenger side kind of settled in lower than the driver's side, so the engine's sitting a little wonky. And so we're really trying to torque on it and get the rear of the engine to slide down in between the engine mounts. I thought I did everything I possibly could to keep those engine mounts in the same geometry they were prior to removing the engine, but it appears that maybe they're a little tighter, or maybe that's just how it was. I don't really know. But anyway, Doug and I just worked at it, kind of yanked on it side to side and kept working without really the ability to lift up in the engine too much more than just take the weight off, because again, that 2x4 is snapped up above us. But we just worked at it, we hammered on it, we got a hammer out for a little bit, we tap a root a little bit, we yanked on it with more pry bar, and eventually it settled in there. One thing I didn't show was me remounting the axle into the boat. The engine is also not lined up to the axle. That's going to happen at a later date, probably this winter. And also there was a missing bolt or two, so the engine's actually not even totally bolted to the boat, which I need to deal with over the winter. But here it is. On the drive home, it started to rain, and that rain turned to snow. And literally, I got the boat into the garage an hour before it started snowing. So there it is. I got some halogen lights shining on it, keeping it warm, and I have a repaired boat with an engine back in it, and I couldn't be any happier. Huge thanks to Doug for helping me storing the engine, pulling it out, putting it back in. Huge thanks to Ron Tanis at Ski Boat Parts Online, and also Andy at Boatworks Today. Without those YouTube presences, I don't know if I could have ever done this.